Thanks, everyone. So I'm excited to kind of talk a lot about how to scale customer success. We've talked about typical customer success motions, but as you get into growing your customer base, there is that essentially that cost to serve solution you have to solve for, and how do you cater to those longer tail customers? To set the scene a little bit, I've been in this role at VMware for 2 years. And the need or the investment in this role came with the fact that we started to have this very long tail of customers, and the revenue that was sitting in that long tail of customers was growing. And they weren't being serviced outside of marketing communications or one-offs. And we need to figure out how to deliver that customer success motion to these customers, because at the end of the day, it was 35% or so of our revenue within one of our BUs. And we all know we don't want to be losing that revenue for just sitting back. So, do I just press the button here? Yeah. Got it. Thank you. So like we reviewed, or a lot of people have reviewed today thus far, a typical CSM is there to drive value and to hit those use case objectives that the customer has. And typically, a CSM goes through this motion of developing a success plan with the customer. So really understanding their outcomes that they want to get. They provide adoption guidance. So maximizing that time to value, making sure they get up and running, they see an ROI in their purchase. And then internally, we talked a lot about that customer health. So how are they tracking on making this progress? And this seems all well and good, right? When you can sit in the room with the customer and have an hour-long meeting, maybe monthly, to talk this out. But how do you do this for your smaller tier customers? That conversation typically is not occurring. So we have to think that through. Here's my little animation. How do we solve for this? It's always risky, right, throwing animation into the slide, so glad that went well. So here's what we found were the key steps in starting this. A lot of it does come back to that cross-team alignment, which has been a common theme here. And you will see the biggest piece was the common operations. So we have a CS Ops team at VMware. They're very active in the way that team is leveraged at VMware. One of their roles is kind of defining the common operations of a CSM and what those motions look like. So we wanted to make sure we had a clear understanding of what CSM's daily tasks were looking like. We wanted to understand the other customer communications that were being sent out. We want to be very aware of email fatigue, making sure we're not sending the same thing. When you get to the company size like VMware, there's a lot of hands in the pot, and you got to make sure the customer is not experiencing a lot of overlap. You start to fall on deaf ears there. And then define a coverage model. So like I said, this kind of role came about because there was a clear definition of that long tail customers that started to need to be serviced. So we'll get into an example of that in a minute. When it comes to strategy, figure out what your engagement methods are going to be. Identify what communications CSMs are doing that are pretty repetitive, what could be kind of scaled more efficiently, and then also templatize when possible. A lot of common practices like a quarterly business review or maybe some benchmarking. How can we programmatically present that to customers? And this isn't to impinge on that high touch model, right? When you deliver, let's say, a QBR and a high touch model, there's definitely a lot more hand-holding and strategy going on. But what are those stats or facts that you're providing that QBR that you could start to level up and maybe deliver through an email cadence? And then operationally, it's important to identify the tools you'll need in order to support this effort. I'll get into this a little bit. But what is your tech stack and what do you need to be able to support those kind of mass communications and also reporting needs? And then building out your team. In our case, we started small. We got 2 digital CSMs and then that CS Ops person to make sure we had that cross-functional alignment. So going back to kind of that coverage model, we at VMware currently, we define this by ARR. So given the ARR thresholds, we try and back into, okay, what does that mean from a CSM ratio to make sure that the attention is appropriately allocated. So we started to fill in this kind of bottom segment, that tech touch motion. It's hard to define that bucket. You're going to hear tech touch, you're going to hear scale, you're going to hear a lot of terminology. So what we define it as is that ARR of 150 or less. Then we started to talk about how do we want to deliver this level of engagement. So the role of a digital CSM is to monitor customers' consumption and manage their digital engagement through the customer journey. And there's kind of three arms to this, right? There's that self-service option. So that may be through a kind of a portal, an interactive portal, where they can identify pathways or leverage documentation to move through themselves, how to deploy something, how to upgrade something. And then also the capability to, we leverage a tool like Calendly. They could schedule time if needed with us. So to be able to kind of have some accessibility to our group. That one-to-many are on demand. So there's a lot of ways in which you can actually scale some of those communications you have. So whether it be onboarding webinars, I think someone earlier talked about around the onboarding for Tech Touch, having like that cohort group come to onboarding. It actually is great because it does kind of organically create that community feel and allows customers to discuss amongst themselves. Offering office hours if applicable, and then really leveraging training. Training can be a huge tool for those within the long tail. The other piece is live collaboration or adoption guidance. In the past, where we've really been able to leverage this was around product roadmaps. So like our product team would get called into a lot of high touch meetings to discuss what was on our roadmap. What we decided to do is actually offer a webinar-based approach to this. So multiple customers could come and hear our product team talk about that roadmap. And this solved not only for that long tail, but we found that a lot of high touch customers were also attending these kind of webinars. So there's a lot of vertical growth when you develop this kind of scalable customer success model. It doesn't always have to just be for long tail. And then you have the pooled team model, and they manage the outreach to customers. So what I'll tap into next is kind of how we are proactive in more of that journey-based delivery. And then there's also your reactive elements to incoming inquiries or churn risk. Sorry, that's a little faded on this screen, but here's a high-level customer journey. I know I had a former colleague in the room who we've memorized this slide now. But what you see is kind of that infinity loop, right? The customer is constantly moving through this cycle. But on this right side of the screen is where the post-sales comes in. And there's a lot about that handoff, right? From sales to post-sales. But what I want to dive into is that onboarding experience. Onboarding is definitely an integral part of getting a customer set up for success and having the longevity there. We talked a lot about that earlier, which was a great presentation, great stats around that. Well, what we've tried to do is put some trigger-based automation around this onboarding. And the way in which we approach this is kind of put it within a box, put a timetable around it. What's the set a time-based onboarding expectation? So in this case, okay, the customer is 90 days to onboard. We identified milestones that need to be met. So we don't want to be surprised come day 90 and say, oh shoot, they've made no progress. We want to make sure we can measure there's been traction and movement throughout this 90-day process so that we can get them on a health plan if they start to fall off. You want to develop training and self-service docs that can complement this kind of rollout. Create email templates, whether it be welcome email, health checks, best practices to deliver. Again, coming back to that tech stack, make sure that you have a tool in a reporting system which you can deliver and also measure the impact here. And then define those playbooks for when the customer does fall off the track. So as you can see in this diagram, the customer has responsibilities, right? We want to lay those out for them and make them be part of that engagement. And then we also have our piece that we follow up, which you see below here, the welcome email and identifying delayed customers, et cetera. So like I said, when you develop a program like this, it's really important to measure the impact. You want to relate this all back to those key performance indicators that you're held to as a CS org and to your bottom line. The way we're doing it right now in my organization, we pay attention a lot to those operational KPIs. So what was the open rate? What was click to open rate? What's the contact engagement? Content engagement. These are really, again, those early indicators. Is the email even hitting them? Do we have the right contact? And it allows us to kind of dive in there and get a sense of where we are. Customer health, we talked a lot about this, wanting to be able to measure that they're adopting and getting value out of the product, in taking that product sentiment and technical support. If we start to see a rise of support tickets, that needs to be an indicator for us that something's going awry. And how do we insert a playbook to start to cater to those customers? And then, of course, there's this financial piece. At the end of the day, when you're developing the plays and outreach within that customer life cycle, is it leading to positive net retention, gross retention, renewal rate numbers? Or are you starting to see churn? And here's some examples of some of the reporting that we look at more closely, right? So like how many emails have been delivered? Again, that click to open rate. And then the biggest thing is trend. So when you get into that adoption metric and when you're trying to scale customer success, you don't want to look at that point in time. You want to be able to measure the impact over time and make sure it continues to trajectory in the right direction. So the final thing I'll leave you with is the need to assess, adjust, and innovate. When you're developing these scale programs, you're not going to hit it out of the park the first time. You really have to gather that customer feedback. Did it work? Was the open rate? Did we fall flat? Again, what's our contact hygiene? That's a huge part of being able to do a success at scale. Establish that strong cross-team collaboration. Let's not over-penetrate the customer with emails. If marketing's sending something out at a time, make sure we're scheduled. Don't try and impinge on everything. If CFSOPS has a new rollout for that CS managed side, follow suit. Make sure that the experience for the customer is the same. It's just the delivery mechanism that would change. And then analyze and adjust playbooks to help meet those KPIs. So if your playbook is not making a difference in how their adoption is growing, we got to make a change there. And that may include having a one-on-one conversation with the customer. I think don't be afraid to have those conversations, but don't go on that slippery slope of doing it too much. That's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. Okay, Q&A time.
Yeah.
Do you want to do the travel, your favorite travel snack question? Or? You have to.
Skittles.
Skittles?
Yeah.
Okay.
And water. Whoever said water, that's key.
Okay.
Yeah.
In that order. Okay. All right, let's get into it. How do you define a digital CSM? Are they customer facing or just sending out digital collateral? Tell us more.
Yep, this is definitely been one of the more challenging jobs to hire for because it's a little bit non-traditional. When looking for this person, it's a lot around those soft skills. I think we talked a lot about that before, being data-driven. So understanding, did the email have impact and being able to make that change? Being a self-starter, identifying where there may be gaps in the customer, where we're servicing the customer lifecycle model or use cases that we could approach. and also that someone who's comfortable with ambiguity. It's an ever-changing kind of development of a program, and we need that team member to be comfortable with that. I think from a day-to-day, their tasks are to create some of this email copy, so they need to be familiar with the product. Again, we have a CS ops kind of arm on our team that actually we use Gainsight to deliver our communication. So they actually go into Journey Orchestrator to build that out. And part of their job is being familiar with Gainsight and being able to leverage the analytics there. Hopefully that answered.
Thank you very much. Speaking of tools, if you could tell us a little bit about what tools you currently leverage or have leveraged to support your automated outreach.
Yep. So Journey Orchestrator has been the tool that we have chosen to use. With that comes a lot of requirements that actually have to go to that like CS ops team and our Gainsight admin team. The key being getting adoption data into Gainsight, getting contact data into Gainsight, having a way to, let's say, that health score, so that CTAs can trigger to notify those pooled CSMs when a customer is starting to fall off. Journey Orchestrator has been great because you can do a query builder. So you can say, hey, grab this customer that hasn't been emailed in the last 90 days and whose adoption is less than 20%, let's say. And that can be an ongoing play that's running in the background. So we definitely leverage that. We've also been leveraging Tableau for just reporting. So a lot of like kick out of some Gainsight data to get a sense of trend of performance of some of our outreach.
Thank you. Question about transparency. How do you organize and provide transparency for email comms to customers?
Transparency. So this is internal, I guess, to make sure that we don't have overlap with marketing. So hopefully I'm answering that question appropriately. We now, when we started out, we had a lot of that, right? Of needing to make ourselves kind of known to the broader teams who are communicating to customers. So we developed a walking deck of what our rollout would look like and when we intended to engage with customers and defined those swim lanes. We're in charge of driving value realization of the service or product the customer already owns. We're not getting into upsell. We're not trying to get into expansion. We are just focused on value realization of what's within. And we're going to start that when we see a customer close opportunity in Salesforce. So that's kind of how we started to try to define those swim lanes. And I will admit that takes time and it's not always clean. And there's going to be times where you're going to say, or where a customer feels oversaturated. But like I said, you have to try it out. And there's a lot of conversation right now around customer success at scale. And the biggest thing is like, you can't be afraid to start. You can't expect it to be perfect when you start. But if you can start to create that walking deck and communicate to other departments within your organization, it can really help smooth the external experience for it.
Okay, thank you. Are you utilizing, and if so, how did you choose it?
Yeah, interesting. So VMware does have like a community page, and in a lot of our communication to customers, we kind of put that as a footer to say like, join in on a conversation. What I wish, and unfortunately we don't have right now, is I wish we could kind of be able to intake common themes or conversations that are happening in that community, similar to like Twitter where you have a hashtag and you can see that. We're not able to level that up very well or in a meaningful way to then be able to be proactive of, hey, there's this common talk about trouble with X, Y, and Z. Let's address it. So while we do introduce the community page to our customers, I wouldn't say we're getting the full value out of it because we're not able to turn it around into giving them a new experience.
So if it doesn't exist as a capability, somebody should go build it. And if it does, you have a sales lead. How do you handle customers who want to expect a higher touch experience but only qualify for digital CS?
Yeah, that definitely
I
happens.
feel like
right?
that's come up today already.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one because at the end of the day, they are your customer. So you can't say, bug off, sorry, you're too low spending. But I think what we try to do, or what we have our digital CSMs do, is prior to accepting getting on a phone call, trying to solve it via resources and links, etc., to get the customer's issue solved. We try to identify as a technical, send them to support. If it's an upsell, loop in an AE or salesperson. So we try to really kind of mesh that out prior to getting on a phone call. We also are transparent with our customer when we do get on. Listen, like, we're a pooled CSM model. We are here to help, but here are your resources, and try and set proper expectations. Because if you start to get into, hey, yeah, well, let's catch up next week, it's going to build. And right now, like I said, I have a team of 2 and we're covering 15,000 customers. So that won't work.
I had a question for the audience by a show of hands. I was just curious if, because we've talked a little bit about these customer success platforms, like by a show of hands, who works for a company that uses one of these? Journey. So a little over half. So, okay, interesting. Let's see here. One other question around automation. So how do you balance automation with customer centricity, doing what's right for them?
Yeah, kind of being aware maybe of industry-wide something that's happening for them versus just being data-driven. I think that is a challenge. I think right now where we're at, we're probably not solving for that very well. We're really using data to even get started here. Trying to get that data has been our focus, and kind of where we've spent our time building requirements for our engineering team to expose that kind of consumption data for us. So I can't say we've done too much there, and it's probably something we need to consider. But data has been our driver for communication thus far, or at least data, consumption data, and then of course like renewal timeline. So.
Okay, and what should we all remember? What's the key takeaway?
Yeah, I think don't be afraid to try and start a program like this. It doesn't even have to be a defined program, but where you're seeing repetitive steps for CSMs, templatize it. Figure out how to do mass deliveries. If product roadmap readouts are an ask that your product team's getting sick of being requested, put it in a webinar. Just try and figure out ways to be a little bit more efficient.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Susie.